Welcome to Police Academy Prep. This is Deputy Z. Today we will be going through the Law Enforcement High Liability book of the Police Academy, going into Chapter 3, Criminal Justice Firearms. This will be the in-depth recording version where I read from the entire chapter and provide insight to potential test questions in real-life situations. Be sure to watch the short edition version if you are looking for a more quicker, less in-depth recap consisting of only highlighted topics. Let's go ahead and jump into this chapter. Officers may face dangers as part of their jobs, including the use of firearms. Failure to cautiously and consistently follow the rules of safe firearm handling can result in serious injury or death. You must acquire proper training on the specific model of firearm you will carry and use before touching, handling, or loading that firearm or any other firearm. When studying firearms, the term primary hand refers to the hand you will use to shoot the firearm. Your support hand is the hand that assists the primary hand. Pretty self-explanatory there. Those are bold, so know those for the test. Safety is the most important element of firearms training. 100% a test question. Safety. Think before you act whenever you are around firearms. No matter how proficient you become at marksmanship, you and those around you are not safe if you are carelessly handle or discharge a firearm. Okay, general rules of firearm safety. These will be on the test. They might present it as, hey, which one's in the correct order, or they might say which one of these are part of the steps. So treat every firearm as if it were loaded. Never point your firearm at anything that you do not intend to shoot. Keep your finger straight and off the trigger until you are ready to fire. Keep your firearm on safe until you intend to fire, if applicable. And know your target and beyond. Rules for firearm safety on the range. So we do have a lot of safety rules here. I will just briefly go through them. Might be on the test. I would say just follow logic and common sense when answering these. I'm not going to go into too much just because there are a lot here. So, obey all instructions. Load only on the range structure's command. Do not retrieve dropped ammunition. Perform unloading procedures even if the firearm is unloaded when on the range. You may leave the firing line only at the range instructor's command. Stop firing immediately at the cease fire command. So, for the test, if they do happen to bring range safety questions in there, it'll be like the obvious ones here, like stop firing immediately at the ceasefire, safety checks, don't pick up ammo off the floor during firing, things like that. Care for and inspect all firearms. Make sure to perform a safety check by pulling back on the slide to the lock position to visually and physically verify that the firearm is not loaded each time you're issued or return a firearm, and every time you pick up, put down, or hand a firearm to another person. So that is a safety check. That is in bold. That will be a test question. That is pulling back the slide to the lock position, visually and physically inspecting it. Okay. Never unholster your firearm behind the firing line. Keep your finger off the trigger and outside the trigger guard when drawing the firearm or returning it to your holster. Always point unholstered firearms in a safe direction. Never handle firearms on the firing line while someone is downrange. Ear and eye protection. Do not talk. Do not eat. Do not drink. Be courteous. Make sure to listen. If you drop a firearm, do not pick it up. Keep your firearm pointed in safe directions at all time. You are responsible for making sure your firearm is secure at all times, including when you are off duty. So there are state statutes here. 790.174. Most likely they won't ask you that statute, but they could ask you what maybe is like the charge, right? So it's 790.174. 1. A person who stores or leaves on a premises under his or her control a loaded firearm, and who knows or reasonably should know that a minor is likely to gain access to the firearm without the lawful permission of the minor's parent or the person having charge of the minor, or without the supervision by law, shall keep the firearm in a securely locked box or container. Know that is a misdemeanor of the second degree if a person fails to store it and the minor gains access to it and possesses or exhibits it without the supervision required by law. So just, if they're probably going to ask you a question on this, it's probably going to be what charges it, and that is a misdemeanor of the second degree. Use of deadly force. Know what Chapter 776 is of the Florida statutes. That is the use of force chapter. That will be a test question, probably a few different ways. They'll ask you what the chapter is. They might give you the chapter and ask what the description is, etc. So again, Chapter 776 governs all use of force by criminal justice officers. Even though this statute refers to law enforcement officers, the legal guidelines regarding use of force apply equally to corrections and correction probational officers. Okay, 776.05. Unfortunately, 05, I think 06 and 07, you will need to know what each of them does. So 776.05 identifies 2 general areas in which an officer's use of force is justified. To 1, apprehend a subject and make an arrest, and 2, to defend self or others. I'm not going to read the statute here. You'll read it when you read the book, but just know that 776.05 is making an arrest or defending self or others. That's when your use of force is justified. Then when we move to... Where is this? When we move to 776.06, know that one has to do with deadly force, which is the force that is likely to cause death or great bodily harm. So 776.05 is the 2 reasons you're justified, making an arrest and defending yourself. 776.06 is deadly force, and 776.07 states that the essential criteria to determine the justification of the use of force, which is use of deadly force may be an officer's first and only response, which states a correctional office or other law enforcement officers justified in the use of force, including deadly force, which he or she reasonably believes to be necessary to prevent the escape from a penal institution of a person whom the officer reasonably believes to be lawfully detained in such institution under sentence for an offense or awaiting trial or commitment for an offense. So 776.07 is the fleeing felon justification. Know that deadly force is... use of deadly force still consists if you shoot and miss the person. So if you miss the target and you shoot, it's still considered deadly force. It doesn't necessarily mean that someone has to die. So remember, it can also just be great bodily harm or no harm at all. You must base your decision to use deadly force on a clear, reasonable belief that you, a fellow officer, or another person faces impending danger or of death or great bodily harm. Again, know that for test questions. You should never fire a firearm unless you are faced with a deadly force encounter. Once you have used your firearm, you have reached the highest level of force, deadly force. Now we're going to talk about ammunition. So in front of me I have a picture of a pistol cartridge and the nomenclature. So this test is going to be mostly nomenclature. So make sure you know that. The test will have pictures and it might point to a location and say, what is this? So know the pictures, know where everything is, and know the definitions as well. So the bullet is the portion of the cartridge that becomes a projectile when in flight, aka the top. The case or casing is the metal or plastic container that holds all parts of a round of ammunition. The primer, so the casing holds the primer, the powder, and the bullet. So that could be a question as well. Head stamp is the markings found on the head of the ammunition that indicates caliber or gauge and identify manufacturer. Powder is the propellant used in most firearms. It produces a large volume of gas when ignited. Primer, the mixture used to ignite the propellant or powder. The rim, the edge of the base of the cartridge case that stops the progress of the case into the chamber. And the round is the complete ammunition cartridge that contains all parts of ammunition. So if someone asks the whole part, don't be confused to put bullet. A lot of people just use that term inappropriately. They are called rounds or cartridges. So just for the sake of this test, use round. Don't get confused with bullet or casing or anything like that. Ammunition can be identified by examining the caliber or gauge found on the cartridge's head stamp. Caliber is a measurement used to identify different cartridge and projectile sizes. It is determined by measuring the diameter of the bore, the inside of the barrel of the firearm. So again, caliper is the measurement used to identify the cartridge and projectile sizes, and how you measure that is the diameter of the inside of the bore of the firearm. Okay, gauge is a measurement of shotgun bores derived from the number of bore-sized balls of lead per pound. That was a test question for us. I know they got rid of shotguns, so it may not be on the test, but it's still possible. So, again, gauge is for shotguns, and it's the number of the size of balls of lead per pound. Okay, inspection of ammunition. We're going to talk about abnormalities and defects when inspecting ammunition. You have the scrape, which is indentation in the case that may weaken the case wall, occurs when a layer of the case wall has been scratched or torn away. Then you have a dent, a dimple, or depression in the case. Corrosion, layering of the case with oxidation or foreign material such as mold, fungi, congealed oil, and lubricants. Or a puncture, actual opening in the case body. So on the test, they might actually show pictures of these types of abnormalities or defects to the bullet. You need to know what a corrosion looks like, a puncture, a dent, and a scrape. I mean, they're pretty self-explanatory. Okay. There are other defects that include the round not being firmly seated, missing primer, half primer, and more. Make sure to check your ammunition periodically. Make sure the casing and rim are free of defects. Determine that the projectile is firmly seated in the casing, and make sure that the primer is seated properly and free of dents. Proper maintenance of ammunition involves any care that helps provide the most safety when using and inspecting ammunition. Use only ammunition from a reputable manufacturer and do not alter the manufacturer's original design. Do not use reloads for duty ammunition. These don't really apply to us because obviously our ammunition is provided. Solvents and lubricants may cause a failure to fire malfunction, so avoid using them while handling ammunition. Okay, now we get into the term handgun. Refers to either the semi-automatic pistol or the revolver. This unit focuses on the semi-automatic pistol, which is the handgun that most criminal justice officers carry. Okay, so now we're going to go into nomenclature of a gun here. So semi-automatic pistols may operate differently based upon who manufactured them. Make sure you are familiar with the part names, locations, and functions of the semi-automatic pistol that you use. Okay, so an accessory rail provides space for lighting and sighting devices. The back strap, portion of the grip that is placed in the palm of the shooting hand. The decocker, mechanism that safely decocks the pistol, releasing the spring tension on the cocked hammer or striker without allowing them to reach the round. The frame/receiver holds the internal parts as well as the inside assembly. The front sight located on the front of the slide. The front strap, portion of the grip that allows the fingers of the shooting hand to rest. So the front strap is where the fingers go and the back strap is where your palm goes. Hammer strikes the primer or firing pin to ignite the propellant and fire the round. Magazine releases the magazine from the frame. Muzzle barrel provides a path for the fired bullet. Your rear sight, obviously on the rear of the slide. The slide houses the firing pin, barrel, recoil spring, sights, and extractor. So remember, the slide, it houses the firing pin, the barrel, the recoil spring, the sights, and the extractor. So I remember on our test question, on one of our tests, they had this question that confused me. I ended up choosing, so the options were, you see how it gave these firing pin, barrel, recoil spring, sights, and extractor. It gave 5 options. It gave like 4 different options. One had 5 correct, one had 4 and missing one had 3 and missing one had 5, but like 2 were totally random. I ended up getting this one wrong because I was thinking housing as in like, oh, it houses it, so it's inside of it. So I'm like, the sights are not inside the slide. So I'm like, that's weird. So I answered the one without the sights. But it turns out that, obviously, I know the sights are on the slide, but I didn't know it houses it. 'Cause usually if something's housed, it's inside, not outside. But anyway, just keep that in mind, as that was something that locked me up there. So slide lock, takedown lever, device that allows quick and simple field stripping. The slide stop lever is a device that locks the slide in the open position. The trigger activates the pistol's operation, and the trigger guard, the frame that protects the trigger. So know the nomenclature, know where each thing is on the gun, study these pictures. Obviously, this being audio, I can't go through that with you here. Then we have the magazine nomenclature. You have the follower, which activates the slide stop and pushes the round up to be stripped off by the forward movement of the slide. The follower is at the top of the spring. Then you have the magazine floor/butt plate. It holds the spring and follower in the magazine. That's obviously the little plate on the bottom. Then you have the magazine insert. It keeps the floor and butt plate secure and prevents dirt and debris from entering the magazine. Magazine tube holds the internal components in place, including the ammunition, and the spring pushes the follower up. Okay. A semi-automatic pistol functions by using the energy from the recoil of a single round of ammunition to extract and eject a fired cartridge from the pistol's chamber and load an unfired round from a magazine into the chamber for the next shot. As you press the trigger fully to the rear in double action mode, the hammer moves back and then releases to strike the firing pin. Upon firing, the slide moves back, extracting and ejecting the spent cartridge case and pushing the hammer to the fully cocked position. As the slide moves to the rear, The recoil spring compresses. When all the energy has been used, the spring decompresses, pushing the slide forward. Then the slide returns forward, feeding the next cartridge from the magazine to the barrel chamber. The hammer remains cocked and the trigger is in the rear position, so subsequent shots fired in single action mode. This sequence repeats until the last round fires. Okay, so your cycle of operation, you have loading, feeding / chambering, locking, firing, unlocking, extracting, ejecting, and cocking. So again, you load the magazine, you feed or chamber it by doing the slide. The bolt then locks. You then fire. The bolt then unlocks. It extracts. Remember, you have to extract before you eject. You extract the bullet, and then you extract the casing, eject the casing, and then it cocks it again. Know the definition of each of these. So loading, inserting the loaded magazine, feeding and chambering, moving the round from the magazine to the chamber by releasing the slide. Locking, the breech or back end of the barrel locks into the slide. Firing, ignition of the primer and firing the cartridge. Unlocking, you unseat the breech and the end of the barrel from the slide. Extracting, pulling the spent cartridge from the chamber. Ejecting, pushing the spent cartridge out of the ejection port, and cocking, returning the fire mechanism to the firing position. Performing a function check. Oh, real quick, going back to the cycle of operation. They will have test questions on this, both asking for the definition of each one. Obviously not all of them, but some of them. And they might as well have a question on the correct order. They might not do all 7, but they might give you 3 and say, hey, which are in the correct order. Performing a function check. This is a test question. A function check ensures that the firearm functions properly. It is usually performed after field stripping or cleaning and reassembling the firearm. Know the steps to perform a function check. Visually check it. Operate the slide several times. Press the trigger. Fully insert an empty magazine. Pull the slide to the rear and confirm it locks back. Depress the magazine release. The magazine should fall free. Depress the slide, stop lever, or pull the slide to the rear and then release. The slide should function properly. Okay. So in a striker-fired weapon, which most weapons you'll have for the academy, you will hold the trigger to the rear as you release or cycle the slide with a support hand. Then you slowly release the pressure off the trigger until the trigger resets, and you'll hear a click. So that's your safety check there. When handing a semi-automatic pistol to another person, always have the safety on, finger outside the trigger guard, secure the magazine, point the firearm in a safe direction, pull the slide to the rear to eject any rounds, make sure to lock it, visually and physically inspect it, and then you hand the person the grip first. So if the question comes up with here, they're probably going to ask you how you hand it to them, and that'll be grip first. Drawing and holstering. Drawing and holstering procedures are the same for all handguns. You'll be taught this in class. I don't really see this being too much of a test question. There are 4 steps here. I do see bolded here. With the handgun in your workspace, know the definition of workspace. It is pulled in close and in direct line of sight, right, like basically in front of your chest, right? So that is your workspace. Okay. Let's see here. And there's some lateral steps. Not going to go through that. Grip. Grip during and after the draw is essential to good marksmanship and achieving tighter shot groups. A proper grip will help you with recoil management. That is in bold here. Recoil management is the ability to control the movement of the handgun when it fires, allowing the sights to return on target in a predictable pattern without having to adjust your grip between shots. Your grip should be firm enough to manage the recoil. Holstering. Know the steps for holstering. You'll be instructed on that. Now we get into loading. Let's see, we have, how many steps here? 7. Hold the firearm with your primary hand and bring it into the workspace. Remember, close to the chest. Retrieve a magazine. Place your index finger along the front of the magazine as you retrieve it. Use your index finger to guide the magazine in the magazine well. Push the magazine in the magazine well with a sharp upward motion using enough force to lock the magazine in place, and then tug it to make sure it is seated. Grasp the slide with your support hand and pull it all the way to the rear while pushing the firearm forward with your primary hand. Then release the slide. Let the slide travel forward on its own. Do not ride it forward as this chamber is around. Decock or disengage if applicable. Unloading. Safety. Bring the firearm into your workspace. Finger outside the trigger guard. Magazine release. Take the magazine out. Eject the round. Lock the slide to the rear. Visually and physically inspect it. Empty gun reload. When the slide locks back because the gun is empty, you must reload. Remove your finger from the trigger, then press the magazine release as you bring the handgun into your workspace. You then reload the next magazine. Now we have malfunctions. A malfunction is a condition that prevents a firearm from operating properly. You can usually prevent malfunctions caused by ammunition if you inspect the ammunition for defects before use. That's a test question there. Before trying to correct a malfunction, follow these steps. Remove your finger from the trigger. Bring the firearm to your workplace. Point in a safe direction. Identify the kind of malfunction and the proper technique for correcting it. So, if anyone asks what is the first step in correcting a malfunction, is removing your finger from the trigger. Technically, that is the first step. Your pistol malfunctions include a squib load, a failure to fire, a failure to feed, a failure to eject, double feed, or a failure to extract. You will need to know the definition of each, which method to fix them, and what they look like in a picture, as that will be on the test and the state exam. So you need to know these, unfortunately, inside and out, and they are a little confusing. A squib load is a malfunction that occurs when the primer ignites and there is no burn or only partial burn of the powder. Usually the squib load is a bullet fails to exit the muzzle and becomes lodged. You will not be able to fix these. So there is no method for fixing these. You will have to basically take apart the gun and use force to get it out. So retreat, move to cover if that happens. A failure to fire occurs when the trigger is pressed, but the round fails to detonate. The following conditions cause a failure to fire. The safety might be on. There's a failure to chamber a round, so use phase 1 clearance, tap rack ready. The magazine is not seated in the magazine well, so tap it in correctly. Or the primer fails to fire after the firing pin or striker hits it. You also do phase 1, tap rack ready. So failure to fire. Any method here that causes the failure to fire, you are using the method 1, which is tap, rack, and ready. And then fire if necessary. So in a failure to feed, the cartridge fails to feed into the chamber. Thankfully, these are pretty self-explanatory. Failure to fire, it fails to fire. Failure to feed, it fails to feed. Failure to eject, fails to eject. Double feed, you have 2 bullets trying to feed. And failure to extract, it doesn't extract. So thankfully, the definition is simple, just knowing which phase to use. So in a failure to feed, the cartridge fails to feed into the chamber. This occurs when the magazine is not fully seated. Use phase 1, tap, rack, ready. So failure to feed, it just didn't go in. It's probably because your magazine is not pushed in all the way. Failure to eject, often called a stovepipe. So failure to eject and stovepipe, use them interchangeably. So they might ask, what is this failure to eject? It might say incorrect, insertion of the magazine, or it didn't double feed, or failure to extract. Just know that a failure to eject is also known as a stovepipe, and this occurs when a fired cartridge case does not completely eject. So weak powder charge, dry ammunition, a couple things, that is phase 1. Failure to eject is where the stovepipe, just think about the casing is stuck in the opening right there where the port is to the barrel, and it doesn't allow the magazine or the slide to fully close. So that is a failure to eject or stovepipe. Again, that is phase 1. So failure to fire, phase 1. Failure to feed, phase 1. Failure to eject, phase 1. A double feed is when a round fails to extract from the chamber and is met with the new round that is being fed from the magazine. The cause of this malfunction includes damage to poorly fitting magazine lips. To clear the double feed, you must use a phase 2 clearance, which will be explained in a later section. Then we have failure to extract, occurs when the pistol fails to extract the spent casing from its chamber. There could be dirt behind the extractor, dirty chamber, broken extractor, etc. To clear this malfunction, use a phase 1 clearance. If you do not succeed, try phase 2. If the extractor is worn or broken, then you're kind of screwed there. So failure to extract, you're using phase 1, but if it doesn't work, then you try phase 2. How to memorize it, that one is specific. You're probably just going to have to memorize it, unfortunately. No special trick there. Let's see here. So you have 2 clearance methods. The phase 1 clearance immediate action drill. So remember, failure to feed, failure to fire, stovepipe, and failure to extract are tap, rack, ready, fire if necessary. So that might be a test question in itself. Tap, rack, ready, fire if necessary. It might say here, what is phase 1? If you see tap, rack, ready, fire, or tap, rack, ready, fire if necessary, always choose the if necessary option. So the first step for a phase 1 clearance, you bring the firearm into your workplace, you tap the magazine, you rack the slide, and you're ready and assess. And then fire if necessary. That is, so if they ask what the last step is, it's not ready, it's fire if necessary. And then you have your phase 2 clearance. So phase 1 does not work, you generally use phase 2, or if it's a double feed, you'll use phase 2. Firearm into the workplace. Lock the slide to the rear. Depress the magazine, and you are forcibly going to strip the magazine from the magazine well. Rotate the pistol towards the ejection port side and work the slide back and forth to make sure everything gets out. You're then going to push a new magazine in, chamber the round, ready, assess, fire if necessary. Accurate shooting develops from knowing and correctly applying the fundamentals of marksmanship. Concentrate on the fundamentals and breathe naturally while shooting to maximize your performance. That can be a test question there. If you're going to maximize your performance while shooting, concentrate on the fundamentals and breathing. Now we're going to get into some stances here. Your offensive ready stance, sometimes called the fighting stance, is the same stance that is used in the defensive tactics. I'm not going to give the steps for that because you probably have that in DT already. That is your offensive ready stance. You have your kneeling stance. So, you're going to be down on a knee. So, I wouldn't recommend memorizing these steps here. The compressed ready position, that is having the gun compressed into your side with a 2-hand grip in your offensive ready stance. And obviously your barrel is pointed downward. You have your 2-hand high point position. Pretty self-explanatory. 2 hands and your hands are high and up. So whether you're in offensive ready or kneeling, your sights are on the target in your 2-handed high point. Your hip shooting position is when you're within 3 to 4 feet away from a threat and you have to maintain control of your firearm. It's going to be a 1-handed grip, and you're supposed to have your support hand in its defensive position protecting your head. Sight alignment is the relationship of the front sight and the rear sight with the shooter's eyes. It occurs when the top of the front sight is level with the rear sight's top edge and centered in the rear sight aperture or notch. Keep your eyes centered behind the rear and front sights, as this is the most important aspect of aiming. Your eye instinctively accomplishes this task with little training. Okay, so sight picture is the relationship between the eye, the front sight, rear sight, and the target. So sight alignment is lining up your sights so they are equal light, equal height, and then sight picture is just the flow of your eyes to the sights to the target, right? So let's see. So when we're talking about sight picture, your sights are going to be, hold on. Okay, so for proper sight alignment and sight picture, follow these steps. Look along the top of the firearm's sight plane. Align the tops of the front and rear sights so that they are of equal height. Center the front sight between the rear aperture of notch to create equal light. Place the sights on the target and then focus on the front sight. The target will be blurry and the rear sight will be slightly out of focus. Use your dominant eye to align the sights. So again, the target is going to be blurry, your front sight is going to be clear, and your back sight is going to be blurry. That is proper alignment there. It is recommended that you keep both eyes open during firing. Point shooting. This is the technique used when you cannot use the sights on your firearm or you have no time to align the sight properly. In this case, the handgun becomes an extension of your arm and hand. Use this extension to point the target or threat and fire. Most flashlight-assisted shooting requires point shooting skills. So just remember, point shooting is you're not using your sights, you're just using as an extension of your arm and basically just common sense, right? So trigger control results when the trigger finger presses the trigger straight back with increasing yet constant and steady pressure until the firearm discharges. Trigger control, the most difficult handgun fundamental to master, often determines a shot's success. A couple questions there. So with trigger control, they might ask what is the most difficult handgun fundamental to master, or they might ask what determines a shot's success. Those are both trigger control. And that is a result when the trigger finger presses the trigger straight back with increasing constant pressure. Follow through. So follow through is where you maintain sight alignment before, during, and after firing a round, maintain your proper stance, grip, and finger placement on the trigger, and you acquire sight picture and reestablish it each time you fire the weapon. So that, know what follow through is. That will be a test question as well. Flashlight principles. Surprisingly, there will be a few flashlight questions on there. The first one probably being the flashlight's main function, which is illumination. This includes illumination for movement, navigation, and searching, as well as identifying and engaging a threat. Let's see. Okay, generally using a flashlight lets you make a smooth transition from search to firing mode. Whenever possible, consider the options of illumination for movement, navigation, searching, and to identify and control suspects. Always positively identify a threat before using deadly force. Okay, flashlight grip. This is how you hold a flashlight. We're going to get into the grips here. We have the Watchman grip. The flashlight is held in the support hand with the illuminating end projecting from the index finger side of the hand. The thumb controls the on-off switch with a side-mounted switch near the back of near the front of the flashlight. The little or ring finger controls it with a side-mounted switch near the back of the flashlight. So, Watchman grip is where you hold it in front of you. You have your hand like cupping the flashlight, and the flashlight is kind of exposed on the top. That's your Watchman grip. Then you have your law enforcement or tactical grip. The flashlight is held also always in your support hand. Illuminated end obviously going front. The thumb controls a rear-mounted switch. The index finger controls a side-mounted switch. And projecting from... They'll show you in the firearms the different types of grips. They could show you a picture on the test of a grip and say, hey, what grip is this? And you have to understand what they look like as well as their definitions. Flashlight techniques. Let's see here. Then we we have 2 flashlight techniques here. Or is that 3? 4 techniques for the flashlight. You have the Ayub technique. To use this technique, hold the handgun in your primary hand and the flashlight in your support hand, always. And you're using the Watchman grip. Okay, so the Ayub technique uses the Watchman grip. The Harry's technique uses the law enforcement, or also known as a tactical grip. You cross your support hand under your primary hand and put the back of your hands together. So the back of the top of your hands are touching, your support hand is under your firing hand. So just remember that the Harry's technique is with the law enforcement or tactical grip. Then you have the neck index technique, which is where you just simply bring the flashlight up to your ear and you hold it there with your gun outstretched. Your FBI technique is where you hold the flashlight far out from your body so that if a suspect were to shoot, they would shoot the light and they would miss your body. So make sure you know those techniques. Again, Harry's is underneath the gun. The neck is obviously by the neck / ear. FBI is out far. And the Ayub is your gun and your flashlight are right next to each other. All right. Let's move on to cleaning the gun. Field stripping. Field stripping and cleaning your semi-automatic pistol. Follow these steps. I'm not going to go through that, but field stripping is basically taking apart your entire gun to its lowest. Well, maybe not all the way lowest levels, but pretty low. Know your cleaning tools, your solvent, lubricants, and your patches and swabs. These could be test questions here. So cleaning tools, they are caliber specific. Use the tools designated for the specific caliber of your firearm. A large caliber cleaning brush or patch tip does not fit in a small firearm and may cause damage. Solvent and lubricants. Several types and brands of cleaners and solvents are available. Use solvent and lubricant specifically designed for firearm maintenance. Patches and swabs. Consider their firearm's bore when choosing gun cleaning patches. Different materials have different absorption qualities. Okay, how to lube. Okay, then we have... Okay, so then it's how to clean the different parts here. Pretty self-explanatory. The firing pinhole, make sure it's free of debris. The slide, you're cleaning the entire slide. Everything you're cleaning thoroughly. You're usually wiping either dry or close to dry. I wouldn't waste too much time memorizing this stuff. I would focus on everything else and then get to this later on if possible. Just know that lubricant is very important. Now we're going to talk about cover and concealment. Okay, so cover is any object or obstacle that creates a bullet-resistant barrier between you and a threat. So know these examples. They will be on the test. Solid concrete wall, vehicle engine block, concrete telephone poles. Okay, so remember that cover is to stop bullets. And know those examples because they might say, hey, you're crouched behind a concrete wall. Are you behind cover or concealment? Then we have concealment. Any object or group of objects that create a visual barrier between you and a threat but may not stop a projectile. Bushes, trees, and cars. Obviously, don't confuse cars with engine blocks. Cover. Always know that cover can be concealment, but concealment is not necessarily cover. Know that walls and doors usually are concealment as bullets can go through them. That might be a test question there as well. When you're choosing cover, make sure you are aware of size, density, location, and versatility. So size should be large enough to fully conceal your body, but any cover is better than nothing. Density, the cover should be capable of stopping a projectile. Location, you need a tactical advantage. And versatility, you need to have options of using side hand, support hand, primary hands, and different shooting positions. So don't be, stuck in a tight position, basically, is what it's saying. Make sure before moving to a different cover, you are aware of your surroundings. If it's cover or concealment. Always search for other locations, etc. You have your lateral sidestep movement. Know what that is here. Let's see here. Shooting from the barricade position. A barricade position is a position behind cover. To fire your handgun from the barricade position, follow these steps. I'm not going to go through these steps. Just know the definition of a barricaded position is a position behind cover. Tactical reload. Know the condition of your firearm at all times. Ensure your firearm is completely loaded before confronting an armed suspect. So you can reload when you want to, not when you need to. So a tactical reload is, let's say your gun holds 20 rounds. You're shooting at somebody and you can guesstimate that you used between 5 and 15 rounds. You're not sure. If you have a break or a lapse in time where you can reload, even knowing you have more bullets, it's better to have a full magazine. That is your tactical reload. Okay, make sure you know how to draw with your support hand, reload with one hand. Alright, survival shooting here. So, active threat and shooter incidents. Active threat / shooter incidents involve one or more individuals using deadly force, such as with firearms, edged weapons, vehicles, or other improvised devices to kill or attempt to kill people in a confined or populated area. Active threat shooter incidents are fast-paced and evolve quickly, leaving little time for officers to wait for backup to respond. Okay, let's see here. You might also hear the term active killer or active assailant as your agent at your agency when referring to active threat shooter incidences. Always assume that you will respond alone, so be prepared to act without backup, and many lives depend on you. Threat assessment. Upon arriving at the scene, scan the area for possible problems and additional threats. The ability to assess the situation or subjects depend largely on your observation skills. Survival stress. Know this definition. It is the body and mind's response to a perceived threat. That will be a test question here. Any stressful encounter, especially one that involves the use of deadly force, can generate physiological changes that affect how you perform on scene and your ability to recall the event. Survival stress may induce physiological changes that dictate the way you behave and perform in a deadly force encounter. For example, tunnel vision, diminished or amplified hearing, increased heart rate, which will make it harder than usual to accomplish basic tasks. So know the physiological changes that will happen from survival stress. That might be a test question there as well. You will most likely lose fine motor skills when you're under an immense amount of stress. Let's see here. Make sure you know that you will need to rely more heavily on your gross motor skills, which are your large or major muscles. Another symptom of survival stress is the loss of complex motor skills. So combination of fine and gross will be hard to do. Let's see, here we go. Mental preparation. Recognize how survival stress will affect your ability to respond, and then develop strategies to manage that stress to prepare for a deadly force encounter. So being in the right headspace. Okay. Tactical response. Well, real quick before we get there. Make sure to avoid the urge to stop and help those who are wounded or scared until the threat has been stopped, since your primary focus is to stop the active shooter before they can kill more people. So again, that's a possible test question. You are supposed to go after the threat until it is stopped before you start providing aid. Tactical response. No matter what your assigned duty is, you may need to respond to an active threat, active shooter incident. Okay. Principles of tactic response include immediate response, violence of action, basically unrestricted speed, strength, surprise, aggression, anything you can do to stop the threat. Direct to threat clearing, which is bypassing all doors, rooms, any potential threats in order to get to the sole location through either sight, sound, or intelligence of where the shooter is at. Noise discipline, using the elements of surprise by moving quietly. Positive target identification. And then you need to scan for and recognize threats on the scene. Pass, a person who holds a non-threatening posture and has been visually cleared of weapons. Hold or assess, a person who poses a fear of attack and does not assume and hold a surrender position or non-threatening posture. Or shoot, an active threat, active shooter that has been identified and recognized as not being able to be safely and immediately captured or contained by lesser means. And then tactics to use immediately after neutralizing the threat. Assess 360 security. Make sure there are no other active threats, active shooters, or accomplices. Self-check. Check yourself. Communicate with responding backup. And provide first aid. And that concludes our high liability Chapter 3, Criminal Justice Firearms. This is the long version, but only took about 42 minutes. I may or may not make a shortened version for this one, considering this chapter was not so long. I might knock one out real quick. So if I do, make sure you do check out that shortened version for test days if you're looking for that quick study. And thank you for sticking with me for this long edition here. Good luck on this test. I would recommend, like I always do when it comes to a lot of steps, is learn the material first really well and then go back and practice all of the steps. Good luck on the test. You guys got this. See you in the next video.